Welcome to our November DALiM tips and tricks. I'm going to be doing the presentation today. What we thought we would do is, since everybody kind of had a lot of interest in the API stuff that we touched on in the past, Brennan had done one, I think, back in July or so, and covered kind of building a website using some of the API functions. I thought I'd go a little bit more in depth in some of those functions. As a reminder to everybody, the GoToWebinar settings in the top left will let you change the zoom on your screen. You can do any questions you have in the questions panel of the GoToWebinar control panel, and it should be on the right-hand side usually. We'll kind of cover those as we go if we see anything that pertains to what I'm talking about, or we'll save them to the end of the conference, the webinar, and go over those individually. So, the ES4 API. What we're going to try to cover today is to show a little bit of how to create and modify a customer. So maybe you have ES and an MIS system talking to each other. You want to use information from an MIS system to create your customers, modify customer information, keep those up to date. We'll kind of cover how that can be done. Create and modify a project itself. So we have some customers out there who use like JDF to create projects. We'll show how you can use the API to create projects as well and modify that project information. Uploading, modifying files. Approving files. Submitting files to a given user action. And that's kind of what we'll try to at least cover here, and hopefully I can put it into context. I'm going to be jumping a little bit inside and out of the keynote presentation to the website itself, showing ES, showing a console that lets us test some of these queries. So please excuse the kind of jumping around. That was the only way I could kind of see to really present the information in any kind of way. The most important part of what you're going to need to, if you start developing anything with the API, is going to be a link to the api.dalim.com website. What DALiM has decided to do, since the API is kind of a living beast in a way, is to keep the document updated on a weekly basis through a website. Instead of trying to have versions of documentation out there and then you don't know if you have the right version of the documentation, they're trying to keep it updated inside of this website that you can get login information for. So if you go to api.dalim.com, you'll be taken to this screen. You can go to the documentation, a test console, which will act similar to what I'm doing. That I'm going to be doing on my own test console that talks to my ES, since I'm familiar with the jobs and everything on my ES. And the most important part is the documentation itself. So the documentation talks about how to do the post, how the JSON RPC responses are coming back, and it's kind of broken up into the different categories of, and let me blow this up so make sure everybody can see. It's kind of broken up into different categories of what it covers. We're going to go a little bit over the customer queries, so customer edit, for example, and customer create and customer edit. I kept the directory stuff out of this webinar because it would have probably taken the whole half hour itself, because the directory stuff is basically controlling your user management, organizations, users, all that. There's a lot you can do with it. If there's enough interest, it is something we could break up into a separate webinar and do one specifically to how to manage customers and users through the directory API. Document. The document API has got a lot of different functions. I decided to just go over a couple of things like document create, and we'll cover get thumbnail and a couple of other things, and something I'll show a little bit later on as well. I think I left folder out pretty much, but you can basically create folders inside of ES projects through the folder method. Job, in folder you can also put things in folders, create those folders, delete those folders, manage the subfolders in ES completely. Jobs, editing, creating jobs, we'll cover that. I didn't really cover monitoring very much, but production, I think Brennan had covered production a lot in his previous webinar, and we can do a couple of workflow things as well. If you go through the website here, you're trying to kind of figure out how it works. You can basically choose what you want. So I want job, and I want to see what the job get function does. It'll tell you a brief description of what the call actually does. It'll tell you if you have mandatory information inside of it, any optional calls that you can make, and then give you a small sample of what the query would be, or the post would be, and then what the JSON result would be. So just let you know if you're in the right category, let you know if you're doing the right things, and shows you here where it says both the mandatory ID or path, it's one or the other. So they could clarify that a little bit. So sometimes you can use ID, sometimes you can use path to actually get a file, and those are covered there. The job create has a lot more, and it lets you just know all the different optional things that you can actually call. And I'll actually cover those a little bit. So if we go back, first one we want to look at is basically creating and modifying a customer. So again, going back to having an MIS system, if you want your MIS system to create that customer, NES, when they're a new customer that's entered in, you can basically do a post like what you see on my screen. Important part that we're concentrating on for this webinar is basically the ID2, the middle section. Brennan had covered the admin login, admin logout functions, and some of those different calls in his webinar. So really we're worried now about the content inside and how we do it. So the methods we talked about from the API documentation site are called here. You tell it which method. I'm doing customer create in this instance. And then we basically have the different parameters that we're actually sending to it. So in this case, I'm sending the name of the customer, a description, the customer code, and the email and phone number for that customer. So as I'm throwing in, so jump out of here and I'll jump back to the website. So we'll see basically, here's a call I'm going to make. I'm going to create a customer called new webinar customer. Description will be test API customer, and the code is NWC. So if I do a post of that, it'll come back. It'll tell me, it'll give me the ID of the customer. ID is good to keep if you are really creating a true integration between your MIS system and ES. The ID is a great thing to keep and have, so that way you know that that's the ID. You can always make easy calls instead of having to query for the ID from ES. So on that, what I should have now inside of my ES is a customer, and if I remember what I called it again, new webinar customer, and we should, and one thing to remember in ES is you have to re-expand things like that. When you create things from behind the scenes, basically, or through the API or JDF, it doesn't refresh the interface, so you have to just collapse the arrow, re-expand it, and you'll see your new customer, new webinar customer, the information I set in. Now, notice, basically, I sent some basic information in. I didn't tell it like things like what the templates are to use, but it did let me create that customer. I can put that in that original creation, or if I had that information later, I can basically do a modify and show that information. So if I come back to here, what I can do is basically do my customer edit instead of customer create this time. And we can do things like add a list of project templates to it. So a lot of times for a given customer, we're not using just one project template, we're using possibly using several. We want to send those in as a list, and basically this is the syntax to send that list to project template list. So I just wanted to show a sample of that. That's not a simple just one thing call. You put it in square brackets, comma separated, and it puts the whole list in. One thing to note about project template, because this is obviously a very important thing to ES, is that you really need to understand how DALiM has created this. We've always looked at it from an interface standpoint, and we have basically what we always thought of the ID as 0, and then a template name, default or whatever your name would be. The DALiM actually considers the 0, or that number you're used to seeing in your interface, as the template name. There is an underlying ID that we don't see in the interface that you need to add to this kind of a post. So you need to query ES for what all the different templates are before you can actually use those and put those inside of here. So just to show you what that looks like, I think I have that in one of these. If not, I'll add one. Yeah, so just do a simple post like this, production, project templates, post, and basically it's just going to return all possible templates to you. And you'll see what I mean here, where basically it has name 0, but the ID, true ID to ES is 646. And then the short name is actually the name that we see as like make ebook or something like that. So it's kind of important to understand that distinction inside of ES. So once I get these and I know all the different ones I want to use, I can actually do my project template list and then set a default project template ID. So in this case, I'm setting the default to 646 and putting those 3 posts in. So I'm also doing it to a static ID. In this case, I'd have an ID I'd picked up before. It's from one of my other customers. I should have changed that, but for the sake of the webinar, I'll leave that in place. And basically, these are the 3 I set inside of here. So these are 3 different templates I used, and I made my 0, which was 646 ID, the default in there. So you can easily change things like that, and I can obviously add any of this information basically. And if I go back to here, any of the information you see in the create for job can be used in the edit to edit and update that information. Okay. So actually, did I get the? Yeah. Sorry about that. I just lost my place a little bit. So once we have a customer, we want to create a project, we can do a post like what we see here to actually create the project. And things to note in that are basically you're calling, you're giving a name, you're telling it which project template name to use. In this case, project template name, so you're calling the one you see in the interface, the number you see in the interface, just to confuse everyone a little bit there. You tell it which is your document workflow you're going to use for it, and you can also set up approvers and the roles that you see on the project. So we can make a call like this and create a project real quick. So we'll go ahead and go here. Sorry. Go here. We'll go ahead and create a project. We can say I'm going to do it in my customer webinar. Call it my new job, and just give it some settings like this. So I can post that. Again, actually I already did that one, so my new job too. And you will get feedback if you have syntax errors and stuff. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to decipher, but here you can see it actually just gave me the feedback that the job did already exist. So I can create that there. I've seen this error. I didn't really have time to troubleshoot it before the webinar, but basically couldn't set the approvers because it was trying to do it actually, it looked like before the job was created. But now if I come in here and I look at my webinar customer, again, I need to collapse, re-expand it. There's my new job too. He said here, if I look at his job ticket, he's set with the default project template of 0 as I set them. Here are the roles that got created. Now, this customer was already set to have Brennan as kind of a part of his users in the project. The other ones were created through the query. So it does use some of the defaults in your project template. And then you see it did not set the approvers as I wanted to. So you can, though, go in, as I note here, I can do a call to modify the project. So I could set the approvers. And if you notice, I could have a kind of just 2 users here where I'm doing user DALiM as an approver, user admin as a gatekeeper. You can add as many of these as you want and do the approvals as complex as you need to inside of ES. So if you notice, I'm calling, and I should have, I don't think I highlighted that. I did a little bit. But up above what I have highlighted there, I'm calling the path to the project, first of all. So if I didn't store that ID, I still know the path to it, and I can use path as one of the parameters to find the project. So the path structure is the customer name, being webinar. Metadata is the project I actually am looking at here. And I'll change that when I do the post. But then the document workflow I'm setting the approvals for. So if you had multiple document workflows in your project, you could change it for each one. But in this case, it's just Whiffle dialog. And then this is the way I'm setting up the approvals. And again, I can do more complex step name to call which step you're setting the approval for. So if you have multiple approval steps, you can do multiple step names and set those approvals as you need to. So let me go ahead and call that. So here we're going to go ahead and set DALiM and admin. And what was my project real quick? Let's make sure we do it in the right project. My new job 2. So we'll set that, and I'm pretty sure it was using the correct project, the correct template. And it'll tell you, here's a job that was edited. It was 17817. Again, I could have used this as the ID up here instead of path, but I remember paths easier, so I just did it that way. Now, if I call that, you'll see I now have DALiM as an approver, admin as a gatekeeper, and I can also do things like set the different levels, set the number of approvals. All of that's acceptable in here, so I can do that as complex. One thing I didn't set up, and I probably should have, is I can do this same kind of edit to a document. I'm going to do a different one later. But if you had a need to actually have different approvals for different files inside of a project, you can also do the document edit and update the approvals for a given file. So if you have a system that can feed that information to ES, you can do that kind of thing as well. Most of our customers, it's always project level, but there are some that require, especially like for catalog work, where different approvers, depending on what's on a page, may it needs to take place. That information can be fed to ES this way. Tell it who needs to approve it on the page, and it'll change it. As long as it's before it's actually gotten to that approval step, you can do something like that. Okay. If you want to actually upload a file to ES, you can basically do a simple curl post to that URL, the upload URL, and pass it your authentication information, the job ID you want to send it to, and the path. The thing with this post is it does have to be the job ID. It cannot be a path, at least not from the feedback we got from DALiM. So if, typically if you're using an outside system, or if you're just using maybe files that are submitted to Twist that pick up from somewhere and it hits Twist, because you maybe want to do something to the file before you submit it to ES, you will have to have something that actually finds the job ID. In our case, I'll show a little sample just inside of Twist itself. And what I had is Jude and Brennan threw something together for me. And find where it's at real quick. I just did a little bash script that finds that information. I'll share that with y'all, because I will send a PDF of the slides of the presentation to everybody, so that you each have these calls if you want to play with them and test them yourself, just as I did them, without having to try to interpret it completely from DALiM samples. And I'll send this script as well, which basically just uses the customer and project information. So maybe you're getting that from a database somewhere, or your file name with a set param from RE, figures it out and takes that information, queries it, and returns back the job ID as a variable for you in here. So I did that, returned a variable, and then basically just have the curl post in here. One thing we found, and didn't have a lot of time to play with it or troubleshoot it a lot, because it was kind of a busy week, so I didn't have a lot of time to prep for this webinar. But basically, if you think of the process directory of a Twist job, there's a comma in that path And from what we saw, from what Jude was looking at, it didn't look like the API liked getting that comma call to it. Curl, he was able to comment it and use it in curl. It didn't seem to give curl a problem, but the API definitely seemed to have a problem with it. So we did cheat a little bit. Basically, we stored a file in a temp directory and then used that temp directory to do our curl post, submit the file to ES, and then basically I should have another call in here that removes the temp file after the call is done. So you see basically I'm just using set param from Mori in this case, or those of you that like to use command merge, you can use that as well. Execute the curl command to my server. My user authentication could be dynamic information that I pass in that maybe I could get from WebLink or something like that. We did it real simple, and I'm making Brennan have to change his password after the webinar because I stole his information. And pass the job ID that I got back from my bash script, and then the file name that I'm calling. So just to see that real quick, come in here, grab a file, go ahead and throw it into Twist. Hopefully I remember to update my input files tool, so it won't take too long to pick up. There it goes. Come in. Now, typically when you do call from set param me, something like a curl post or anything, since set param from Mori is meant to write a variable, you will get this error that it can't be evaluated, but it still runs the actual post itself. And I think I just had that hard set from my old job here. So my file would show up here and be posted to ES. So it just gives you a nice way to actually send the files to it. You know, a lot of times we have done things where we send files to workflows and then we're evaluating the hot folder to put it back into at the end of the workflow so that ES can pick it up. This way you can do it through a curl post, submit it straight to ES, straight into the project, and kind of bypassing the issues you may have with input rules or hot folders or even mounts. Because in this case, you know, if you have another Twist server or it's an external Twist server, if you're sending from one site to maybe somebody you know that has Twist, you can use this and just use the curl post as long as you have 8080 or 443 open to your server. You know how to get to it. You can post a file to it and not have to worry about mounting the folders. So kind of useful for that. What you want to do in hand with that is, since you really can't pass any variables through this kind of post, you can build this, obviously we can build this into a web page. I think I've done a webinar before where I showed the print-on-demand sample SDK site that DALiM built. They use a post like this to post a file and then update the metadata of the job. But you can actually do that on the document level as well and modify the document itself. So in this case, you make a call like this where you're doing document edit. I'm calling, again, the path to a given file. And I'm updating metadatas. You can put as many different ones in here as you want, but you basically have to call, you know, the metadata set itself, the property, and then the value. That's the three things you see here. So webinar metadata is my property. Well, the new metadata is the property. The metadata set is webinar metadata, and what you see new metadata there on the right is the value itself that I would be sending in. So I should have that set to go as well. Here it is. So my value I'm sending should be, this is our new metadata. I'm updating this file, mag1345.pdf. Again, I'm calling the path to that file. If I had the IDs, or if I did a search and got the IDs, I could use ID there instead. But a lot of times we do know what customer, what project, and what the file name is we're trying to update. So it's really simple sometimes to call it that way. Then my param here is metadatas. So if I go ahead and update that, it'll tell me it edited this file. And if I go look, that is this file here. And I should have made that bigger, but basically this is our new metadata, is written into there. So obviously any metadata properties I wanted to update, I could do that. The usefulness of this, I was going to try to show something, but it got a little bit too long and I was running out of time. But I had this running at a customer site, and basically what they had a need to do was know what images were used inside of a given page. So they're in their workflow, they're always basically proofing and annotating the pages only. They never soft-proof the images. So on the page level, they're annotating, they're asking for the markups, the silos, everything at that level. So what they needed was a simple way to know what images were on the page so that when the retouchers looked at the page with the markups, they could find what images were used there. So what I did is actually, one, I used writing a metadata to write a specific metadata set or metadata tag inside of the JPEGs that they place on their pages. In this case, it was JPEGs, or it could be a Photoshop, TIFF file, whatever you want. But I created a custom metadata set that I could write into there that basically just has the image's name on it. Reason being is if you look inside JPEGs and that, its file name is not necessarily in there. The original file name, maybe the raw file it was created from or something, is a lot of times in there, but not its own name. So I did that as metadata in the image, the file system part of their workflow. I do that at the very beginning. I tag it so that when it's placed on the page in InDesign and that PDF comes into ES, I have a script that can look for the images that are placed on the page. And what we do using this API is we actually update the images with the page that they're used on. However many pages it is, it'll just keep tagging them on, and then the page with all the images that are included. So we kind of have a reference both ways. Now DALiM in ES5 is going to be doing something like that where they're going to be able to reference pages and images together, but you would obviously have to use their plugin to place the images inside of InDesign, I believe, the way they're creating it. We'll see in at the Worldwide Technology meeting. But this allowed me to do that even before I get ES5, or in this case, the customer actually cannot use the plugin because they actually use another piece of software to link their images through. That kind of automates some of their functions. Pretty nice product from what I saw as well. But since they're placing it from this other system, I lose that connection that I would have had with ES anyway. So by having that metadata, I can find those images, tag them correctly, find that in my script, update the metadata, all the files, and then I can have a smart view that they use and just say, hey, show me everything related to this page, and it shows them the PDF and all the images that are tagged from it. So it's pretty nice, and it's a nice use of this. And actually, I also have an approval step in that. So if you want to do an approval, now the approval, a little bit trickier because obviously an approval is going to really be specific to who the approver is. But you can go ahead and do approvers through the API. So you could have another website the customer logs into, maybe it's a dashboard type website, and they could actually do the approval like this. And what I'll do is actually show you, I had Brennan just really quickly throw something together for me that would be a sample of that. So maybe they would have a dashboard site like this that would actually just use a lot of different API calls. So we're actually, the API itself for the approval, if I threw it in here, I'm not sure I did. Just let me see real quick so I can show what it returns. No, didn't have it prepped. But basically, all it shows you is for your given user what document IDs you have to approve. And that's all it gives back to you is a document ID. So based on the document ID, Brennan threw together something that went and got the file name, the project ID, grabbed the thumbnail using the API, and gave me an approval and rejection button, as well as, you know, obviously the user that does the approver. So the API call basically he put in here, and I can go ahead and approve these pages through here. or reject them, and that's all just API calls I'm doing. So you can kind of create a little dashboard that a customer maybe can log into if you don't want to take them into a smart view or into ES, and you just want to have them really have a simple interface like what you see here. They could quickly go through something like that. We could have done a link to soft proofing in here if we wanted to, if they wanted to annotate, but maybe they're just looking for content, something simple, and they want to do it. If I refresh this, those that I rejected and approved would be out of the mix now, and we would go on. So just a nice way to use those functions. If you think creatively, you can really think of different ways to come up with stuff. And then the last one I'm going to cover is basically taking files, submitting them to a user action. This is actually, I don't believe they even added this to the documentation yet. This is a new one that you will see that is already in ES with the latest beta patches. But what it'll let you do is send a list of files, in this case, what I'm doing, to a given user action. A nice function that we actually use it for as well, we found, is the ID. If, for instance, I'm using a section or a project, and that ID is a section or a project, it'll take all the files of that section or all the files of that project and submit it to that user action. So it gives us a really nice way to do like an ebook automatically through an API call. So just giving somebody a trigger that, look, they don't want to go all the way into ES and have to select all their files and submit them to an ebook. They want to selectively say, well, for this project, I want one, and click one little button maybe and have an ebook made. Or for this section of the project, cover section, body section, I want to do it. I can do that. So in this instance, but the sample I have here is basically just sending a bunch of different IDs to the user action, and I'll go ahead and run that in here. And yeah, I think I have it here. So if you notice, I basically have just a commented separated list of a bunch of files I have in ES. Submit it. Again, it runs it as my user. Now, in this case, my user action is a basket function. So it is going to show up in my basket. I could do anything I wanted to with it if I wanted to put it somewhere else, but it's in my basket. It's done. Download it from my basket. And there, I just threw a bunch of images on it. Now, the contact sheet one, what I have to learn to do is basically fill out the form that gets submitted to the contact sheet so it gets named properly and we get it, the header and footers set up nicely. But the sample of this would be maybe I'm doing proof sheets or just whatever we might want to do in a user action. It's nice to be able to do that through the API. So that's the stuff I was covering. Going to go over questions now. So let's see what questions we actually have here. Let's see, we have a question, is the user password passed in plain text? Brennan, do you know that? Because I haven't really paid attention, I can't say. I would imagine if, go ahead.
It's actually plain text, but usually in like PHP and other code, I put it in base64 encoding. Mm-hmm. But usually in Bash, it's plain text.
Right, if you use it through there. Okay, thank you. Let's see. When you use the upload URL, do you have the opportunity to find the folio variable since you are bypassing the input rule? Not that I've seen it, if I'm not mistaken, on the input. And remember, you're not necessarily bypassing the input rule. It still does take effect. You just don't have to worry about that part of it as far as the hot folder goes. It's still going to have to, it's basically like an upload. So if you look at your upload input rules, it is going to use those, and it can set the folio based on the file name, just like it used to if you click in the interface and upload. Yeah, I think I might have been unclear in the way I stated that. And is there an easy way to parse the JSON from the API in a twist workflow? Brendan, I think that's a question for you as well.
Usually you would just pipe it to an exec and you can throw it in a bash command. If you pipe it to a JQ command, run in bash, that's any kind of simple JSON parser really would work. But definitely my preferred method would be to run in Tickle exec it to a JQ command. I think Fred actually showed an example of that in one of his scripts.
Yeah, I really didn't show the scripts themselves. I could have throwing those in there. Like I said, I'll have those included in an email I'll send out to everybody that's on the webinar. It'll show you kind of a little bit of what we did in the bash scripts, just real quick. They're quick and dirty, but we threw them together and they work for our purposes.
So to answer his question,
write them.
and JQ, it's an extra JSON parser for bash. I think that'll help them out a lot.
Great. All right. Another one is, and I think there's a couple of them here, about the logging in and logging out constantly, making calls. When you make a call inside of the interface, what you'll notice returned is going to be basically information. Is that right, Brennan? That's where it's at, right?
No, it's on the bottom. Session? It's on the bottom of your screen right now.
Sorry, yeah, you're right. That was the password. Yeah, so you'll get this session ID passed to you. So if you log in at the top and you're doing a lot of different calls, you can use the session ID to pass that keep alive before you log back out. So you can use this on different pages. To, go through something complex and then have a log out. Just remember to log out because, and you'll find this, like if you have a typo in your code, and you will start eating up your users inside of ES. And I'll take a look and see if I've actually done that since I was playing before that. But if you're not careful of logging in and logging out, you see like I have 3 different logins right now. You do have to watch that, especially if you're limited. Like my demo server's only got 5, so I kind of ran across that a few times. So just something to watch for, making sure you do get cleanly out of any calls or any pages you're doing. And I think that's all the questions we had.
Mr. Fred, if you go to STK API site, about the URL and the username and password in plain text, you can actually see where it is encoded at the top if you make that smaller window bigger. And that's actually how the username and password is passed in most cases.
Yeah, that right there, right?
Right, that is actually the string of the username, the password.
Okay, great. Thanks, appreciate that. Okay. Well, that was all the questions we had. I hope all of you found this informative. It was kind of fun to throw together because I don't get to play in this world too much. I always wind up passing it off to somebody because I don't have the time to play with it. So it was nice to actually get in here and have some thoughts and see some of it put to work. Again, as a reminder, we do these webinars every second Wednesday of the month, as long as it's not a holiday. You can find out our schedule on our events page on our website, blanchardsystems.com. My plans for next month, whatever day that falls on in December, is actually going to be to do a Worldwide Technology Meeting recap. I will be at the event with Jude. I'll take good notes and try to present everything like I did last year in the limited time frame we have, to at least give you an idea of what was covered, what's coming for next year, and all that. It's been a good event, so hopefully it keeps up with that. It's the same venue near the DALiM headquarters in Kale. So hope to see some of you there. If not, I would definitely plan on it if you ever get the opportunity to attend the event. It's always the first week of December, at least it has been for several years now, and it is near Kale, Germany. It's a good event. It's a great opportunity to kind of mingle with other customers and users from around the world. What I found is that at the event, there's a lot more interaction between the customers, the vendors, and DALiM than I typically see at the Duo events. The Duo events are a little bit more quieter. We tend to be more reserved and listen a lot more, where the Worldwide Technology Meeting, maybe it's because of the people that make the trip. We've had a lot of user interaction, a lot of discussions, a lot of really good debates about where they're going with the software, why certain things aren't in it, how we're using it. So again, I would recommend the event to anyone who gets the opportunity to attend. So for that, everyone, I hope you have a great day and great rest of the week, and thanks for attending.